Welcome back to the Black Carnivore podcast. I am really excited to bring today's guest, to Sally K Norton. I'm sure many of you have heard of her. She is the oxalates lady. She knows everything about oxalates. She talks to us about it. And it is an incredibly important topic that hasn't really that is sort of new to many of us. Some of you may have heard the term oxalate dumping, but not really known what it meant. And today we're going to get into all of that and, answer all of these questions and really get you starting to think about how you sort of manage your diet and manage the symptoms if you're having them, and how you go forward. So I am really excited. Let's just dive right in. Sally, can you introduce yourself? Who are you and how did you even come to this topic? How did you even start talking about oxalates?
Yeah, well, I've been kind of a health geek since I was a little kid. I think maybe because I had issues that led to tonsillectomy at age 5, so I think I naturally gravitated to that. So I'd run home from kindergarten and go, Mommy, we're supposed to eat blah, 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 whatever. I was like into it and always loved food. I'm a foodie. I love, the vegetables and the main dish. And I'll like, as a little kid, I would go, okay, can I have more of that? And then comes time for ice cream. I'm like, no, I got to go play now. Bye. It's like, I would like secretly eat pickled herring with my mother as a little girl. Like, so I like food, I like flavors. And I thought, I want to be well. And I was raised to think that how you eat matters in terms of your health and happiness. And then in 7th grade, a science teacher showed this film strip that got me thinking, my goodness, if disease is a product of how you eat, then knowing what to eat and how to live would be cool, because then you don't have to get cancer, heart disease, whatever. So I decided as a 12-year-old that I would get into the nutrition degree. And I didn't know the term at the time, but I wanted to help people be well, which is what we call health promotion, do education and support people who are seeking better health or even health recovery. So I've been at this a long time and been in the field of public health, which works on population health. It's not really clinical, although public health starts with sort of epidemiology, which is like looking at big data sets and trying to figure out what causes disease. And it started with like infection, but the nutrition field is housed inside public health. It's not inside medicine. And that's where I've been hanging out for decades. And, I've been trying to eat well and gardening and all this stuff and doing organics like since the dawn of time and haven't been healthy. And it got bad and bad and bad and worse and worse. And like you cope and you struggle and you cope and you make yourself go, but eventually you can't go anymore. And it got to the point where I quit my career. I had a faculty position writing research grants and was sort of on the sofa. Couldn't get off the sofa, couldn't read the mail. This is not good. And I had to have a hysterectomy. That's part of what prompted me to quit. I couldn't sit anymore because my back was so messed up. And after the hysterectomy, I didn't recover properly. And I was flat out. My endocrinologist sent me to his friend, a sleep doctor, who found that my brain was waking up 29 times an hour. So in addition to having fibrosis and bleeding and bad back and bones and fatigue, well, I couldn't read because I couldn't sleep. It's amazing I didn't kill anybody. Not sleeping will make a person a mad person, right? So that was another 3 years of figuring out, well, is it the SIBO? Is it the digestive problems causing this brain toxicity that's not letting my body sleep? But I had a clue in 2009 before my hysterectomy when I had an attack of genital pain that was intense enough to make me just want to be done with even having genitals. Stop. And it turns out online, you can find the Vulva Pain Foundation, which has been teaching the low oxalate diet for 26 years. And I went back and looked at my textbooks. There's like 1 inch over in this chapter and 1 inch over here. And like, it's not in the textbooks. It's not in our education. So I didn't get it. And I was quite skeptical about it. I had to learn through my body. And luckily, this is so real that your body is going to teach you and coach you as to how real it is. So I don't know if that's a good answer.
No, that is. So wait, are you saying that the hysterectomy too was the need for it was caused by oxalates as well, or did you have like a number of things going on and the oxalates made that worse?
Yeah, so according to physiology and oxalate researchers, oxalate aggravates something called the inflammasome. It aggravates the immune system. It becomes a particulate item that's hanging out in your tissues, including uteruses and endometrial tissues, and creates fibrosis because it's interrupting cell function. So you get these inflammatory fibrotic diseases, you get deposition diseases, you get osteoporosis, osteopenia, and you get all kinds of inflammatory based problems because it becomes a pollution that's affecting enzymes, it's affecting cell function, it's affecting tissue maintenance, and you get into tissue maintenance and repair problems. And when your tissues can't maintain themselves, and that involves cell duplication, so cells replicate to produce the future cells because nobody lives forever, including a cell, and you've got to have offspring. Well, if you can't create offspring because of the effects on your enzymes and your energy as a cell, instead you start producing this collagen glue to hold the tissues together, and that's fibrosis or scar tissue. So your tissues start converting from normal tissue to scar tissue and continues to have inflammation because it's a product. The scar tissue is a product of too much inflammation and poor tissue maintenance. So you get into these what I call inflammatory fibrotic diseases, of which endometriosis is one of them.
Uh-huh. So I want to come back to that definitely. And I think I wrote to you like maybe 2 years ago asking about endometriosis because I have that. And so I was asking like how oxalates was part of that. So I definitely want to ask you more about that. But before we dive into all of that, can you like on a base level explain, what are oxalates, where we get them, and like what happens overall in the body? And then we can dive into like the particular things that we see people having.
Yeah, I love the idea of talking about endometriosis. We
Yeah.
could do a whole hour on that. Yeah, so
Yeah.
oxalates are coming from plants. Plants make them. It's actually pretty ubiquitous in nature. Oxalate is a tiny little chemical. It's so little, it's hard to follow it around in nature and in physiology. It's only 2 carbons. It has 4 oxygens on it, which makes it very sort of oxidative molecule, very reactive. It's an acid. It drops protons.
Wait, so for those of us not chemistry oriented, what does that mean that it's reactive, or why does that matter?
Yeah,
When I hear
so
reactive, it sounds like nuclear, so that seems bad.
it's
I
a
don't
little,
know.
it has a charge on it, right? And it's polar. So polar meaning that one side has a different kind of charge than another. And it's really, this is an important concept in physiology because all of physiology is really, it's based on the cell membrane keeping a battery differential. So, batteries have a positive terminal and a negative terminal because if you put them in your device upside down, they don't work, right? You got to have a different charge on each side. That's how a cell membrane works. So inside a cell, you've got one charge, and outside you've got a different charge, and you've got to keep that differential, and that takes a lot of physiologic activity. And so the membrane is a really clever structure that uses these fatty acids and these, the outside of them is polar, it can do water. So fats repel water. So there's a special structure. We have certain kinds of fats on the outside and certain on the inside. Well, oxalate comes along and it flips all that structure away. It messes up the structure of which fatty acids are in which side of the membrane. And it creates this electromagnetic pull and stress that stresses out not just the cell membrane, but the membranes that make up our mitochondria. Mitochondria are enzymes or membrane structures. You see, all of the enzyme reactions that is life, doing life, they're happening on membranes. And so oxalate comes along being this reactive charged molecule and it starts messing up the membranes. Not good. So that reactivity, in particular with oxalate, is causing membrane damage, but it's also attracting minerals. Minerals are charged ions, so they have many of them positive, like calcium, 2 positive charges. Oxalate likes to have 1 or 2 negative charges. So the perfect pair is pairing up with calcium, but also any other mineral. It can be heavy metals, it can be nutritive minerals. And the problem with eating a lot of oxalate in the plant foods is that it creates mineral deficiencies and later on creates B vitamin deficiencies. One of many problems, in addition to messing up the membranes and messing up enzymes and messing up cell energy and cell production. So we are eating a lot of these oxalates that have this interaction with our metabolism and our nutritional status every day, because they're very pretty much a lot, you could say, and bioavailable, meaning it can get into your bloodstream in peanuts, potatoes. Now, who doesn't grow up on either potatoes or peanut butter sandwiches? Like, it's so common.
So
Right? And
wait, so let me make sure I understand. So the oxalate, I'm almost imagining it's like a magnet that's pulling minerals with it into wherever it goes. And because of its nature, messing up the signaling with the membranes of cells, it means it can go into places it's not supposed to and change what that cell is actually doing because of its nature. And it's bringing in minerals to places that aren't supposed to be. And because it can move throughout the body globally, you know, these sort of behaviors can happen anywhere in the body. And whatever problem you're having is just a reflection of where that collection of oxalates happens to be. Is that it?
You're hired. You're hired. That's perfect.
Okay.
You need to be on the oxalate team out there teaching it. That was all perfect. And this is quite profound because you start collecting extra calcium inside your mitochondria and your other cell suborganelles. These are the organs inside of cell. You start doing
so those of us who've been taking calcium like over the last 40 years being told take more calcium, are we like accelerating this process by having even more of it? Oh, okay.
Yeah. So see how easy it is to be confused, and most doctors are confused in this very same way. Calcium is actually really protective because the calcium will bind some of this oxalic acid in your GI tract, and so you don't absorb as much. So protection.
Now, I had this happen. My dog ate a couple of leaves from my philodendron, and then in the middle of the night was like gagging, and it was really scary. So I called animal poison control, and they said, oh yeah, there's a lot of oxalates in there. Give her some milk, and that should help to bind it. If she starts having trouble breathing, head to the emergency room. And so at 3 a.m, I had to go buy milk. And then I'm like, how am I going to get her to drink this? And I was imagining like trying to pry her jaw open and pour milk down her throat. But I just put out a bowl. She drank it, and actually it worked. And I was like, okay, so that's good to know. I guess it does bind if you drink it, at the same time.
That is a great story. And this is really common, actually. Plants and, house plants tend to be very high in oxalate. This one back here is really high in oxalate. Mm-hmm. This is and then Dieffenbachia is one that's in the malls all the time and out in the public. You see it around, and people get in big trouble with just one drop of sap from the plant will put you in the emergency room with an oxalate reaction.
Wait, which plant?
The Dieffenbachia plant. It's a lot like this one. Looks like it has wide leaves and usually has this a bit of a yellow in the middle. Dieffenbachia, and that's famous for oxalate poisoning, and it's famous for having these rapide crystals, which we'll get to. But everything you're saying is really true about it can get anywhere in the body and cause trouble, and the calcium is a remediation and a prevention piece. So getting a lot of a high calcium diet is probably one of the reasons why the nutrition field has been pushing milk for 100 years, because we really need the vitamin A, but we need the calcium and the potassium. And we're like having trouble getting those nutrients when we move to cornmeal and junky foods. The more junk, the less of good minerals and so on. So milk's been this protective food that's been pushed by mainstream nutrition for a long time. And it is very protective to have a high calcium diet to a point, but it can only bind so much because there just isn't that kind of perfect mixing where you're going to get every ion of oxalate acid connecting with every calcium. It just isn't working that way. But calcium also helps us get rid of an oxalate problem. It helps in the colon if we have enough hanging around in the GI tract, because we only absorb 20% or so of the calcium that we eat. And we take calcium for oxalate poisoning to not absorb it. We want it as a bioabsorbent living in the colon, because the colon can help the kidneys get rid of oxalate out of the body. Most oxalate is getting out through the kidneys and the urine, but the colon can help, especially if you're really toxic with it. So having extra calcium is very therapeutic. And there's plenty of science that shows that high calcium does not cause kidney stones. It's the oxalate is the main cause of that, and so on.
So wait, so the calcium is helpful when it's going through the digestive tract to bind the, the oxalates. But you're saying the individual oxalate crystals, when they attract and hold these minerals and bring that into the cell, that's where calcium and other minerals is a problem.
So this is a confusing thing that I try to keep teaching in my group classes, because nobody gets this right. Like, oxalate in the plants that we're eating comes as oxalic acid, which is an individual ion, one molecule of 2 carbons, and calcium oxalate crystals. In the crystals, many of them are so big, they're the ones that cause, when you eat the Dieffenbachia sap, you get crystals already damaging the mucous membranes, and that's bringing on an immune reaction. But in the plants, it comes as both the acid and preformed crystals, because the plants make these crystals specifically for their metabolism and self-protection. So what we're eating, it's mostly just the acid individual ions that get into the blood. And it's when it gets in the blood or in the cells, when it starts connecting with the calcium and magnesium and iron and so on there. And it's usually forming crystals in the tissue, we call it in situ, like not a lot in the blood, maybe, because it's just still at the molecular level. So it takes about 8 pairs of little calcium oxalate molecules. So in comes oxalic acid, the ion. Oh, and it meets some calcium in your bloodstream. Now it's calcium oxalate, the molecule. And then it finds a friend and pairs up, and then a bunch more pairs to come together. And we've got a little party that suddenly can form a crystal. So then you have this nucleization, or whatever they call it, as you just get the seed developing, the beginning of crystal development. And it takes a certain situation where the crystals form. So a lot of that crystal formation is occurring when the acid's already gotten inside the cell. It finds calcium in the endoplasmic reticulum. It finds calcium in the mitochondria, and then crystals start forming there. But crystals also, they come along at these little molecules, or these nanocrystals. Now, nanocrystals are uber small. They're smaller than a single fat molecule. Like, they're so invisible. You cannot see them. They will get attaching to membranes, and there they sort of sit there with their electromagnetic charges, attracting more and more friends, and start forming crystals on cell membranes. And the membranes that don't defend themselves are the ones that were recently injured or came from a dying cell. So if you get bruised or you work your hands all day long, you've got cells dying every day. And it's those cells that are weak, overworked, undernourished, or inflamed, or dying, or dead already, that tend to collect the crystals. So like you said before, oxalate can get anywhere, and it can start setting up shop and building up accumulation in the body, but it depends kind of on where you've got stress, inflammation, where you've got heavy use. So if you're a runner and you're messing with your knees or feet, you're going to be more likely there. If you sit and type all day, it might be your elbows and hands. If you just had surgery, your surgical scar may hang and hang and hang, because you end up with oxalate collecting in that surgical scar. And you end up with this little bit of fibrosis that we call scar tissue. And the fun part about the carnivore diet, or any other form of a low oxalate diet, is your old scars will start going away. Just as an aside, that might get us back to endometriosis someday. But yeah, so the thing is,
can you also just run through? Can you also just run through some of the other ways that you might see it? I mean, you talked about, knee pain, joint pain, and inflamed cells. Like, are there other things? I mean, you also talked about the uterus, and, does your brain how does your brain maybe react to if you have oxalates collecting, and are there other parts of the body where you would feel something? And is it always pain, or is it something else that you might feel?
Yeah, so it's symptoms and tissues. And in a broad stroke, oxalate is very neurotoxic and create a lot of neurotype problems, memory problems, brain fog, mood problems, bad sleep, autism, dementia, Parkinson's disease, you name it. So there's a lot of potential neurodamage, including loss of myelinization, which is a disease called MS or multiple sclerosis. So you can get all forms of neuropathies eventually. But the sad part is that your body is so good at like in different, your body, meaning we're all really different. And some people are really good at hiding this and managing it in a way that reduces symptoms to nothing. And often there is no symptoms for a long, long time. And it isn't until that you've been building up a sort of energy production deficit in your cellular metabolism and a certain level of stress of happening behind the scenes as the body's trying to cope. And then suddenly something demands high energy in your life, and all of a sudden you've got problems. All of a sudden you're really sick. All of a sudden you're spewing oxalate crystals because you had a trauma, an accident, you gave birth, something that demanded extra energy from your system, and there wasn't enough extra energy to give. You were skating on like minimal reserves and didn't know it until you really challenges yourself. So you can be developing an oxalate crystal accumulation problem and have no symptoms at all. And that's important for people to recognize, because there's a certain hubris of I'm great, and then suddenly you're not. So
Right.
I'm a big prevention kind of gal. That's what we do in public health. We believe in not letting people get damaged, sick, injured, or murdered. Like we'd rather make those not happen. It's
Me too. I'm on board.
It's a very weird thing because you can't prove that you're succeeding if you prevent something. Like the guy next door didn't get shot, so yay, we did something good. Like you can't prove that. So people don't go for prevention. There's not good money in that. Isn't that cool? Right. It's hard to sell products for that. But prevention is good, but you can't know. You can't really know. Yes, if you have neurological problems, if you have connective tissue problems, if you have immune system problems, you need to be thinking oxalate, because oxalate's a major promoter of bad connective tissue, osteoporosis, and immune and inflammation related diseases, and neurologically oriented diseases. You need to get this out of the way of your health problems, because even if it didn't cause it, it will promote those problems. So if you have symptoms, you ought to learn about oxalates and learn whether you're eating them or not, or whether you did or not. But if you have no symptoms, it doesn't mean it's not an issue either.
But the way you describe that, like the brain fog, the inflammation, the pain, and that sort of stuff, I mean, that's also like the exact things that people come to keto and carnivore for, and a lot of times see reduction in. So how do you know whether those things are being caused by sugar, vegetable oils, or oxalates, or both? Or, should you always be thinking both are an issue, or what?
Well, I think you've just described the trifecta of suffering. Those three together. That's really what the science seems to say to me, is that a combination of a high carb diet with the vegetable oils and with oxalate is sure to bring you misery at some point. You might get away with it for a little while, but that is the really evil three. And when you go to a proper carnivore diet, you're getting rid of all three. And that's good. A little bit of sugar on a low carb diet is fine. I believe in a little carbs. A lot of us with oxalate problems have so much metabolic damage. We need some carbs, but that's because there's not this really tight, strict line. You've got to be a certain way 100% of the time. That's not how physiology works. But that general pattern of us pigging out on carbohydrates 4, 5, 6 times a day for years, and this margarine and mayonnaise and these seed oils that are in all the crackers and all this stuff that we like so much. And then there's always like obvious problems like donuts and so on. But that combined, a lot of people who are like sneaking their donuts and potato chips are also like, oh, I better eat a salad today to make up for it.
Yeah.
You bring in extra oxalate. You might have had a peanut butter or a Reese's chip thing or something, where you've got the chocolate, by the way, is high in oxalate along with the peanut butter. And we kind of got away from the foods question.
Yeah.
Whether you're doing the green smoothies, the keto nut bread, or you're like a junk food junkie who loves potato chips and chocolate bars full of nuts, there's lots of ways to add too much oxalate. And even without sugar or even without these vegetable oils, people got sick on oxalates 200 years ago. And it was a known disease then, before we had, well, of course, back then, the people who got sick on oxalate were often eating rhubarb, and you needed to be able to afford sugar. So they were getting some sugar. And to get sick on rhubarb, you had to sweeten it. So it was kind of the elites who could afford sugar, because in the day, in the 1830s.
Is that rhubarb pie or?
Yeah, or I guess they would call them tarts. So this is British food, though, because it was the Brits who really saw this poisoning problem. They are tea drinkers. Tea is high oxalate food, and they love their potatoes. So having 4 to 6 cups of tea a day and potatoes, and then adding rhubarb in the spring in the form of little pies or crisps, or in the day they may have made like little cookie like things. Who knows? We'll have to find some good old cookbooks if there are any. But this seasonalness allowed for them to recognize the diet connection was really obvious.
Gotcha.
Right.
So, yeah, sorry. So wait, but what are some of these high oxalate foods? And I'm glad that you mentioned tea. And what about coffee? Because a lot of times people ask me about drinking tea, and I say, it's okay if you're okay, but if you're dealing with any kind of inflammation, my experience is that it seems to flare that up. And I always used to get nauseous when I drank tea, and I just never really drank it much. Herbal tea was okay, but like real tea, it was just like always a problem.
Real tea bothers me too, and as does now all the herbal teas. The sad part about the oxalate poisoning and a plant-heavy diet, because I was a vegetarian for 16 years, and the plant-heavy diet, I swear, if you keep that up, eventually you won't be able to eat any at all, because your system will start becoming hyper-reactive to all of it. And that's why so many of us end up over here in this animal-based diet, because it is so healing to get rid of all these chemicals. Oxalate's not the only troublemaker, but oxalate's this sort of gateway to disaster. So tea, it's inside a carnivore diet. If you're tolerating tea, sometimes it's a useful way to avoid excessive body clearing of the oxalate accumulation, because you go down to 0 oxalate and the body is so ready to get rid of it. It knows how to get rid of it. It's been wanting to do this for decades, and it will. And so sometimes we actually use tea as a way to deliver enough oxalate to signal to the body, wait, don't clear so fast. Don't, because that's a toxic process. So, but people like you and I, and a lot of us who are over here and now what's, the meat-based dieting, are in trouble with hyperreactivity of all kinds. And we can't really say what it is, but tea is a real irritant. It's got a lot of chemicals in it that are horrible and causing trouble. And it's funny that we—
You mean naturally in it or added to it? I don't know the process.
Okay. Yeah, even just the tannins.
Yeah.
And interestingly, our saliva has an enzyme to help break down tannins to protect us from tannins. This is another compound in plants. But when you drink things in a tea or a smoothie or whatever, the saliva is not really mixing with that food very well, and you're not eliminating those tannins well. Whereas in the old days when you had to use teeth and chew stuff, probably that mechanism in the saliva. So we kind of bypass some of our little protections, and then of course we do things. So I don't know if that's enough of an answer, because tea is an interesting topic.
No, I think that's a great
superfood.
I think that's a great help. And I don't know if you have more on your website about it, but for those of you who are watching who do drink tea and had questions about it, definitely, I think it's worth continuing to do research on it, because tea, it seems to me, is like more of a problem than coffee, oddly enough, for people.
Yeah, I think that's true. Although personally, my doctor told me I shouldn't be around coffee. I'm more allergic to coffee than any other thing, apparently, according to testing. So coffee's low in oxalate, by the way. So that might save my life. Otherwise I might get shot. It is low in oxalate. And I've got on Instagram, I've got a couple posts on tea and a couple posts on coffee. And I have a whole article on coffee on my website, on the blog space there, that explains basically about how bad the science is too.
Uh-huh.
Even just these
Okay.
reports, because there are reports in the literature that says that coffee is high in oxalate from peer-reviewed scientists, and it's completely nonsense.
Okay. Why is there so little discussion of this? I mean, you said the British are the ones who've sort of dealt with this sort of the most in the last couple of 100 years because of the nature of their culture and diet, but why is no one else talking about it? I mean, when my dog, ate the philodendron plant, like the people in animal control were like, "Oh yeah, sure, this is what you do." So it sounded to me like this was not brand new information for them. This was like a normal thing to tell people. So
All the day's work for a toxicologist. and yet,
yeah.
and yet the brilliant step of realizing that if we overexpose ourselves to oxalate has not been recognized. And even toxicologists are begging for us to make this a part of the research, but it's a handful of individuals in research, but the whole infrastructure and institutional umbrellas have to pick it up so that the people who decide who's going to write the chapters in our textbooks actually are people who know enough about it to mention it appropriately and cover it appropriately. Sadly, you go and look at these textbooks, like in the nursing textbooks, and they'll have a list of 30 foods instead of 2,000, and there'll be 6 mistakes on the list. And this is sanctified by major.
So a fifth of the list is already a problem.
And this is what we're teaching the professionals. So the professionals are really misinformed, and they're just not getting enough training in it. In the lab testing, even the pathologists aren't really trained in how to see oxalate in pathology, because there's these cultural waves of what matters, and a lot of background influences on what matters. So now when you have a tissue biopsy sent to the lab, it sits around because we're just looking for malignancy, which is cancer. We're not looking for all the other problems the cells are having. And we're not finding disease earlier in the pipeline of disease development. Obviously you didn't get cancer today, you've been getting it for 20 years. So, but we don't really catch it early. And with oxalates, for sure, we're just ignoring the heck out of it. So I've done a lot of research about that, and I've got a book coming out, and I spent a whole chapter or so talking about why they're missing it in medicine, why we're missing it in public health and nutrition, and how that all goes. It's a long conversation, but it's disturbing. I'm in the field of nutrition and public health, and it's very disturbing that I made myself so sick not knowing this information. And when I reach out to my fellow colleagues in integrative medicine and in nutrition and public health, I kind of get hung up on. They don't have the conversation. Even like what happened to talking science together? It's just not a cool topic, but we're going to change that.
Well, I was in grad school and I was getting my PhD in anthropology, and way back then, we used to have these sort of Friday gatherings in the social sciences. And so, they would sort of engineer, sociologists and anthropologists and economists to go hang out and have beer and start to talk so you could cross those lines. So that kind of thing needs to be instituted in the medical field. They've
given lip service to it all the time. I mean, in the grant development world, we're supposed to do this cross-pollination, and we're supposed to lift up new and innovative ideas, even if it's a 200-year-old innovative idea. And it's not happening. I mean, when I quit my job as a grant writer, I was kind of glad to be done with it, because it just is frustrating. We give lip service, but we're not getting to some place that I feel is substantive. Here we are stuck being misinformed and undereducated about something as basic as too much peanut butter is a problem, too much spinach is a problem. These should be known facts, and they're not.
Well, when I first started hearing from you about the oxalates, I thought, I heard the first few things on the list, and I thought, oh, I guess I don't really have a problem with oxalates. The few times that I would eat kale, it would make me so sick every time that I finally just stopped eating kale, because I was it was sick every time. And spinach was also one of those things that I did not really like. And, I went through short bouts of eating a lot of it, but it's not something that I ate on a regular basis. And same, I think, with all of the greens that were very bitter, there's just only so much that I could do. And then my taste would turn off. But then when I saw on the list, chocolate and nuts, I was like, oh my God, I'm in trouble. I mean, oh my God. So, what are some of the top or most popular foods that people need to look out for? And then where can they go to find a fuller, more broader list?
Okay, so right now the popular ones are the spinach, and then the superfoody things like turmeric and the nuts. The almonds in particular, almonds and peanuts.
Oh, so I had an ex-boyfriend who would buy turmeric and get those empty capsules from Amazon and fill them up and take like 6 or 8 a day for inflammation. So he was causing inflammation.
Yes, it was causing inflammation.
He had paying for the pleasure of causing inflammation. Okay.
Yes, although if you buy curcumin extract, the extracts don't have a lot of oxalate in them. And so that's another thing. Like peanuts are high, but peanut oil is not, because oxalate is remember, has a charge on it. So charge molecules hang out with water. They don't hang out with fat. So when you make a fat or an oil or an extract or essential oil, they're not going to have oxalate in them. But things are becoming like weirdly popular that shouldn't be. Like now I'm seeing star fruit in like Starbucks drinks. Star fruit is known to kill people because of the oxalate level in it. It's so known in the literature, and yet it's not known in the food culture. So we're missing out on any differentiation, any distinction. Actually, kale isn't actually very high in oxalate because it's part of the cabbage family, and the cabbage family in general is not interested in making a lot of oxalate, which may be why we invented all the cabbage vegetables, because they're less toxic from a point of view of oxalate than spinach and beets and beet greens and Swiss chard. Swiss chard is basically beet greens. This is very, very high in oxalate, as is sorrel and purslane. And like you could get all schmancy and go to a high-end restaurant and get a little bit of sorrel, this or that. No, don't eat that. It's just a garnish. Trust me.
Well, the drink sorrel I loved. And, I mean, there's obviously huge, Jamaican communities in New York and in Brooklyn. And so one of my favorite things was to get sorrel, which is, I guess it's red, it's super sweet and very sour and delicious. So was I just drinking oxalates?
If it's real sorrel and it's real sour, the sourness is oxalic acid helps make things sour.
Oh, great. So that's another place I just drink buckets of oxalates.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and how about ginger and ginger beer?
Yeah, ginger itself, ginger root is pretty high in oxalate.
So the ginger beer and the sorrel, great.
Yeah, I'm not sure about if ginger beer has been measured very much. The problem is there's umpteen infinite numbers of foods. We're very creative and we turn foods into new foods and we keep inventing foods. So it's hard to keep up on the testing since no one seems to care. And we don't require this on labels. So new products can just invent high oxalate foods and no one's wiser for it. Although in Asian stores, you might look in New York and see if any of the Asian stores are warning you when you buy spinach that if you have kidney problems, you shouldn't eat this food. Because here where I am, sometimes the Asian stores will put a little warning in the produce department that says, if you have kidney problems, don't buy the spinach, kind of thing.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there, like you said, like your dog gets sick and everybody knows what's wrong with him. You get sick and no one has a clue.
Yeah. Okay. So we've run through quite a few interesting things. Anything else that is common that people might be eating, like in herbs and spices? Does it matter if you're only using a little bit of spices in your food?
Surprisingly, some of us who get on a low oxalate diet find that the getting rid of the spices is the last piece that makes them finally feel good. So yeah, the spices can make a difference. And sometimes, like on a carnivore diet, keeping a few of them around, like with the tea, might actually keep your body from overly, what I call kind of upchucking or puking out oxalates from all your orifices because you don't want to dissolve up these or release so much stuff into your bloodstream, because it's like you're getting poisoned all over again at a higher level. It can be more toxic to suddenly go to a zero oxalate diet and carnivore than it was to be eating these things. Because in the sequestration, where the mode of the body, like, okay, you're throwing it at me again and again. I'm getting good at this. I'm good at this. I know what to do with it. It's coming in just a meal level each time, which is 8-hour event because you're absorbing it for hours afterwards, and you get a peak after a high oxalate sorrel drink full of spinach and almonds and what, smoothies or keto bread. It's really about 5 hours, 4, 5, 6 hours after you've eaten it when you get the highest level in the urine, highest level in the blood. So you might have felt great at 2 when you had the smoothie on the street, and then right after dinner you start to feel kind of out of it, or punky, or get belchy, or get irritable, or start yelling at your dog. That could be the oxalate poisoning clicking in after the meal. But when you quit eating it, you could create this oxalate poisoning from the internal stores that can torture you and be difficult and dangerous even.
So how do you know when you go carnivore, how do you know like what's too much, or when you need to slow down the dumping? Because, I just jumped right in and I didn't really hear about the oxalates until I was already a year in. Although in that first year, I still had cheats and stuff sometimes. So I felt like by the time I'd heard about it, I was kind of like, I guess I've kind of gone through the worst of it. And, and so I may as well just keep going instead of trying to, potentially slow down dumping. But for new people now.
Do well. Some people do fine on the carnivore diet and don't need to add back oxalates. And some people just continually to feel better on the full carnivore thing. And there's a lot of physiologic differences and lots of other factors that just aren't studied. So we don't know. Some people don't notice oxalate clearing for a couple of years after the carnivore diet. It might take a year and a half, 2.5 years. It might depend on your kidney health. I think some people spend the first year or 2 on carnivore just cleaning up their kidneys from the oxalate. And it's after, when your kidneys get better at oxalate clearing because you've been on the carnivore diet, that's more a time when the rest of the body goes, oh, okay, now it's okay to get rid of this stuff. And I think some people's bodies are able to regulate the release better than others. They've just all along been managing it better because they haven't had a lot of symptoms, and then they're managing the release a little better than some of us and there's factors that include, how deficient you are from way back, how early in life you got exposed to this stuff, because it passes the placenta. And so your mom's body and diet might affect all kinds of aspects of your long-term health that don't even show up until you're hit 50 or something. So there's a lot of unknowns, but generally the basic idea is that we have been accumulating a toxin, and deaccumulating it is stressful on the body and demands a lot of energy and a lot of resources, and create periods of feeling poorly. So if you go to a carnivore diet and you don't feel that great on it, it's not necessarily because carnivore is not working. It could be because it is working to help you get rid of your toxicities, especially oxalate. And that process can be really unpleasant. So the beauty of understanding oxalate and how you may have this toxicity inside you, and now you're undoing this toxicity during the carnivore period, will help you to not throw away the value of a meat-centered diet out of confusion, not recognizing what's going on. And this is a big problem. If we're going to do research on carnivore and see if it helps people, if we don't recognize that oxalate clearing is part of the carnivore journey for most of us, then we won't be able to understand the true value or how to do this better. We won't really develop the technological awareness of how to do this well. It's really important to recognize this oxalate accumulation process from our sort of peanut, potato, turmeric, spinach loving, beet loving lifestyle. And the keto, a lot of us got here through keto or juicing, and you're here because nothing seems to work. And if nothing has worked, it might be because no one ever tipped you off that you're kind of like your dog. You've kind of bit off too much oxalate.
Yeah. So what about artificial and, natural sweeteners like stevia and other stuff? What are there oxalates in those?
Not really. Most of them are pretty low oxalate as far as I know. Xylitol turns into oxalate when it's given as a IV, which they don't do anymore because of occasionally somebody dies from oxalate poisoning xylitol IVs. And because again, there's like a metabolic difference. Some people's metabolism turns so much of the xylitol into oxalate that they die. And so they just can't use it because there's no way to tell who's who.
Right.
With the dietary xylitol, there hasn't been enough research to establish that the normal amounts you might eat would turn into enough oxalate to be a concern or not. So I generally tell people to not worry about it. But actually, part of this in your previous question is, you know, where's the oxalate coming from in our lifestyle? Vitamin C is a big source of oxalate because it becomes like oxalate.
You mean vitamin C that's in any, naturally in any orange, strawberry, broccoli, wherever?
Right, right. Just with a quote normal diet, nobody knows what that is, but they talk about it all the time in literature. I have no idea what they mean by that. But the normal diet, what's in your toilet in terms of oxalate that you're peeing out every day, which you are every day, you're peeing oxalate. Half of that minimum is just directly from the oxalic acid in your food. And the about 40% of it is coming from the vitamin C in your food. So if you eat a high oxalate diet and take vitamin C supplements and take more than about 200 milligrams a day, you're really increasing the oxalate load. Yeah, most people take
lemons and limes too then.
Well, lemons and limes are excellent, and I highly recommend them because the citric acid, especially in the lemons, helps to dissolve oxalate crystals.
But aren't they vitamin C?
They are about 30 milligrams per lemon.
Oh.
So you need, you know, 60 to 120, somewhere in there every day. So 3 lemons a day would keep you inside your what you need. And it's a needed nutrient. I recommend getting some vitamin C, but people are eating foods that are fortified and they're eating fresh lettuce and fresh foods that all have vitamin C. And it's very easy to meet your RDA with just a salad. Like there's a lot of C in fresh produce like lettuce and tomatoes. And then some lemon is great for the citric acid. You need it. But then they're eating fortified this and fortified this. And then they're throwing in supplements. And then they're adding, a gram or two. Oh, I might get COVID. And let me give me 10 grams. This is an oxalate disaster to pig out on vitamin C.
Oh, so I grew up in the, you know, the 70s. My parents were hippies and they believed in, you know, what was that guy like Linus Pauling or something?
Yeah.
Right. So when I was a kid, like they'd give me 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C when I was sick. And sometimes it would end up causing diarrhea because that's what happens when you have too much. And yeah, I had a lot of vitamin C as a kid. Good to know.
Yep. My grandmother believed in it too.
Yeah.
She took a chewable, and they taste good. They're like little sweet tarts, the chewable C. So it's easy to develop a daily habit. But if you have kidney problems, that's especially bad because it really create kidney stress from all that oxalate.
Gotcha.
So yeah.
Well, if you don't mind, let's turn to talking about endometriosis. And I think that that's I mean, you know, it's not really talked about enough, but it causes, you know, a tremendous amount of pain and problems for many women. And I would love to know, you know, if oxalates is the cause of that. You know, I always had cramps and a lot of very painful periods from, you know, from my very first one. And at a certain point, like, I mean, you know, it was always bad, you know, and I'd be with that person who's like throwing up places and like curled up in a ball on the floor because I was in so much pain. And eventually I got to the point where I'd go through a jar of like 100 Advil for each period, you know, so over like the course of 3 to 5 days. Yeah. And drinking like, and adding alcohol because that seemed to like thin the blood and also, you know, like make it more effective. Yeah. So I did that for a long time. And then finally I was like, this is just, this is so bad. And everyone of course talks about how bad Advil is for your stomach. And certainly that many in a short period of time has got to be terrible. And I had read this study about ginger really helping with menstrual pain. So I decided to try it and it really worked for me. I mean, basically I would, you know, just get ground ginger from the supermarket, mix it with hot water, and I'd just sip it constantly through the day, but it did help. And by 6 months, like no longer had pain at all. And I didn't even really need to take the ginger anymore. And I stopped even drinking the ginger tea, and I just didn't have cramps anymore. I don't know how that happened or why or what that was about. But then in my early 40s, I started having like weird, menstrual cycles. And in 2012, I had a cyst on my ovary that burst, and I ended up having to go for emergency surgery. And, by the time like they got in there, I had it was a chocolate cyst. So a cyst that had endometrial cells in it. And it burst, and it had a blood vessel that was feeding it. So when it burst, I was just bleeding out into my, into my uterus and wherever. And so I lost about 2 liters of blood by the time they got in and did the surgery and all of that. And, that I guess I had a couple of cysts. That was the problem, but it wasn't PCOS. It was just endometriosis. And so after that, I didn't want to go on like birth control pills. So I ended up trying to manage it with acupuncture and Chinese medicine, which was pretty good, but it was expensive and a lot to do, weekly to go and have these treatments. But eventually the cyst came back, and then I had started having menstrual bleeding, and that just went on endlessly, like 4 or 5 months of daily, constant, super heavy bleeding. And that was actually kind of when I went carnivore, and because I was so anemic and so exhausted, and it helped a lot to give me more energy and more iron. But I did ultimately have surgery to remove the ovary and the cyst that was on it, but they had no explanation for why I was bleeding like this. Still no explanation. And, there were all of these drugs that I guess it was like progesterone. They kept giving me higher and higher and higher doses, trying to get the bleeding to stop, and it wouldn't. And I ended up going to an African herbalist who gave me a powder, which did stop the bleeding. But I don't know what it was. I can't really explain it. I'm sure it was super high in oxalates also, but I don't know. I don't know what happened, but that was the only thing that stopped it. And then, and from there, like I started to do better, and I was able to recover, but, and I haven't since had a recurrence that I know of anyway, of the cyst.
Wow,
So,
this is a really great story, and there's so much in it. Like there's all these pieces we could develop out for 15 minutes. And it, the pain you describe is really something, and it reminds me of my IBS days, which was my high lectin, high oxalate diet, and it was fenugreek for me that could cut those IBS cramps, temporarily and get me through it. But literally, you can't drive when you're having that level of pain. You can't control the car. It's really stops you in your tracks, and you end up bowled over in a corner in the bathroom wondering why you're alive. Like, what's going on? It's terrible.
Yeah.
And then, of course, our only answer are these NSAIDs, which immediately causes inflammation in the gut, which makes us hyperabsorbers of oxalate, which really, and all the processes that you're describing in this disease process of proliferation of the wrong kind of blood vessels in the wrong place, and then their weakness where they pop open. There's too many and they're weak. This is the kind of tissue aberrant problems that oxalate can create. And endometriosis really is a toxicity disease. It comes
what does that mean?
Well, it means that toxins are interfering with normal cell regulation, and this dysregulation going on because of toxic interference. But, all diseases, in my opinion, are a combination of deficiency and toxicity. If we weren't interfering with cellular processes and undernourishing the cells, that's a way of interfering with cell processes, is they don't have the right amounts and mixes of nutrients, then things go awry and things go wrong, and that's called disease. So this is really the 2 ways you can do it. So, but the endometriosis world has been saying for a long time that it's toxins, it's too many toxins, maybe that were occurring in your mom's body even before conception and during fetal development and so on, because the ovaries are built in your mom's body. So your mom's nutrition affects your
She,
ovarian.
when she was pregnant with me, she told me she craved and ate at least 2 pints of strawberries and yogurt every day. So I don't know, maybe the yogurt helped.
And I think those cravings are a sign that the mother's having nutrient problems. And the research suggests that almost all pregnant women are deficient in B1, for example. So that means most babies are born borderline deficient in B1. So it sets up a lot of things early on, our fetal development and so on. And I think a lot of these female reproductive problems in long-term, our genetics, a lot of the genetics include mitochondrial genetics, which only come from the egg side of the family. So, your grandmother's diet affects your life very profoundly, because nutrition is affecting the genetic expression, it's affecting a lot of things. So yes, oxalate creates damage to vascular tissue proliferation, fibrosis, and disrupted cell communication, disrupted hormones. And you start, having hormonal problems and having these kinds of problems. There isn't any good research directly connecting endometriosis and oxalate, but there's plenty of basic research about how oxalate is wrecking our cellular metabolism, that it's a complete fit.
But now with endometriosis, I see people saying that you should eat low or to no meat and no animal fats. That's what they say.
People say a lot of things. And
I mean, like, doctors even, but doctors
even, as if doctors had some direct line to the omniscient God that smells like. They don't. They don't. But I too had endometriosis. Okay. I had silent endometriosis. It wasn't until the pathologist, they cut me open for my total hysterectomy and found pooling blood in the pelvic area. They found endometrial scarring on the colon, and it had been there for a long time. He's like, "Oh, your ovaries are really messed up," because we were hoping to save one of the ovaries, because the sonogram said one of my ovaries was cystic and it would have to go. But the deal was leave an ovary, but they got in there and it was total mayhem and trash. Everything had to go. And clearly this has been going on a long time. And I truly believe now, having read all this literature about the cellular mechanisms and how oxalate works, and there's a lot of research out there, that endometriosis and this destruction of my uterine tissue and the whole thing was related to oxalate. But also I was a DES baby. Diethylstilbestrol was a drug they were giving women who had a history of miscarriages, trying to force higher progesterone levels with fake estrogen. And it didn't work, and it caused cancer in the children. They call second generation, and the third generation tend to get cancer as children, or a lot of us couldn't have babies because we were too messed up. It changes the shape of the uterus. It does all these things.
Wow.
Cancer. Yeah. So I think that vulnerability of being a DES fetus added to like where the oxalates are going to mess me up, because I had a messed up uterus and fallopian tubes and all that from the DES plus high oxalate diet. So I ended up with, luckily, silent endometriosis. I had easy periods. They were light and 29 days on schedule, and not a problem until my vegan diet had me eating tofu every day. And I was getting worse and worse in my late 30s. And
so soy is also a big part of oxalates.
The soy has a lot of oxalate, although tofu doesn't. There's like 150 varieties of soy at least. And some of them are much lower than others. And the varieties they grow for tofu happen to be lower in oxalate. But the phytoestrogens, the estrogenic compounds in soy are really bad, I think, for all of our reproductive health. It's very bad to give young boys soy and soy milk. It's affecting their hormonal health. So soy, those of us who were vegan, like kind of poisoned ourselves with soy too. So then easy silent endometriosis turned into kind of a mess that turned into such bad bleeding. That's why I quit my job, because one day I had to spend the whole day in the bathroom bleeding. I couldn't leave the bathroom, and I was bleeding out pancakes of clots and crying because I'm trapped in the bathroom bleeding and no one can help me. So it was silent for a long time, and then it was a total disaster.
Yeah. Well, my doctor was kind of astonished that I didn't have pain when I went to see her. I mean, with the whole cyst, because, I had been doing that ginger for a couple of years before that. And so, I was like, how could this happen? Like, I didn't have any pain. And she was like, yeah, I don't know. Like, most people with stage 4 endometriosis are in tons of pain. So I don't know. How did you not feel any pain?
Apparently, over a third of women with endometriosis have no symptoms at all.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a known thing that the diseases can, because the body's amazing. The body is trying to keep you okay and keep you moving. Because if it doesn't, then you're going to be bear meat. Somebody's going to get you. Like, it's part of survival that the body allows you to function, even though stuff is happening.
Right. So I must have been having a problem like from very young, because at 12, that, that's when I started my period, and it was a problem from day one. So even up to that, like even only 12 years of life, I still must have over consumed oxalates significantly.
It's easy to do.
Yeah.
Really easy.
Wow.
To do.
So for everybody who's watching,
like probably doing tater tots in school, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So for everybody who's watching, like the girls' health is really, really important. And, what's happening at a very young age is going to set up, fertility and all kinds of issues going forward. Endometriosis certainly can cause infertility. So I would assume oxalates then has a close connection to infertility too, right?
From both parents. I think people right now who are eating a lot of almond flour and spinach smoothies are having trouble getting pregnant because the sperm are not good, and the hormones in the woman are probably messed up, and there's probably a fair amount of inflammation. So even implantation is probably not going too well for a little zygote trying to form. Yeah. Right. Gosh, you cannot emphasize enough that humanity depends on the health of our teen girls, our little girls' health matters a lot, and her health starts with grandma's diet. We got to get serious about kids and what they eat.
Yeah. No, my grandmother was like a total meat lover. She was not the grandmother who was in the kitchen baking cookies and stuff. She was making Cornish game hens and lamb chops. And, so that's the stuff that I ate with her. And she used lots of butter, like just mounded it on. But then later on, everyone was like, no butter. So she started using like country crock and all that kind of stuff, but always tons of fat and lots of meat. And, and a little rice, and like, she liked acorn squash. That was one of her favorites. But, but my mom, on the other hand, didn't want to cook at all, but, kind of went with the early 80s style of, low fat, whatever. And, so I had like very different, food culture, depending on whether I was at my grandparents' house or my mom's house. But I always loved meat, beef especially, never could get enough of that. And I couldn't get enough of it because I wasn't given it as much as I would have liked to have it. I would have been happy to eat nothing but brownies and steak all my life, and I would have been totally fine with that. So I would have been a good carnivore had that even been an option. It would have been hard for the candy and whatnot, but if I could get rid of that, like I would have been fine being a carnivore.
Yeah, and I think naturally gravitate to meat. I think if you're encouraged to eat it, and if it's in a culture that says it's okay, then you love it. Like, it's what we eat is a learned thing. But meat is instinctively attractive. I think it's the one way you can convince a guy to help cooking is to light up the grill, and then suddenly grilling meat, they're ready to cook. Like, it's sometimes hard to get your husband or whatever to like really participate in food, acquisition and laying out the table. But I think the background of grandmother having a meat-based diet and using real butter helped everybody survive the next generation's diet. So even though that social pressure to use margarine and garbage food, and a lot of people, even Julia Child, gave in to low fat and did books on, she's the butter queen.
Yeah.
She taught Americans to cook real food and to use butter, and yet she knuckled under. And the children of the Rombecker, the Joy of Cooking, they tried to put out a modernized version, and luckily that didn't work.
Yeah.
But we keep moving in a direction in nutrition that seems to be going more astray, away from what we need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for people with endometriosis who are, sort of still struggling now, what if you go carnivore and take out the oxalates, I mean, is the endometrius too entrenched at that point to actually reverse it? Or, are you going to have worse endometriosis as you go through the dumping? I mean, like what happens for those people?
I wish we knew. I wish we had research on it. I wish we had attention on this. I wish we had a subgroup amongst low oxalators on endometriosis. I don't know. And everybody's response to the diet is very idiosyncratic and unique, even though we share, I mean, in my group meetings, we all share these same patterns of, well, you get fatigue, you get grumpy, as you're clearing oxalate, that means your brain and everybody who gets blood flow, which is hopefully every cell in your body, is getting another dose of high oxalate exposure while it's clearing it out of, say, your hip bone or something. And so that can create lots of neurological symptoms, which include the mood changes, flat affect, where you just feel like unmotivated. You get clumsy, where you go to set something down and you miss the edge of the table, or you walk through the door and you bump the door frame. Like there's all these signs and symptoms that you're clearing. So if you're going on
my God, I used to notice that during my period. I would just be so clumsy. And when I could normally judge where to put something, I just wouldn't be able to do it.
The periods are meant for women's bodies to detox, right? I think that's why we do monthly cycles, is to detox junk. And I think the malaise is part of telling women, take a break, go sit in a river with your girlfriends and rest and heal your bodies to stay strong and be able to nurture children. Because otherwise, breast milk is loaded with toxins. It's the way the body's getting. We don't want the breast milk loaded with toxins. We can shed some toxins every month. So it makes sense that periods would make you like neurotoxic, because your body is stirring up and removing toxins. And people don't recognize that your short, impatient mood and your clumsiness and your sense of frustration or your lack of motivation is actually a symptom of toxicity.
That is really helpful to hear. And I hope everybody who's watching this is really taking that to heart, that, these are not signs of, deficiency in women, but actual, a healthy process that's working.
And physiology is affecting our moods and attitudes and even what comes out of our mouths sometimes, so not criticizing yourself as like this imperfect person who gets short-tempered or who's clumsy or who's, this or that. This is a struggling body who's doing the best it can. And you just aren't aware of what your body's doing for you every minute of the day and how it's trying to cope for you. And so it's really easy for women to put a lot of demands on themselves, expect themselves to be amazing and perfect all the time, and then not recognize how much their body is struggling and how much it's a physiologic battle that you're dealing with, not some kind of character flaw.
So what are the signs of oxalate dumping then to look for? You said like brain fog, the fatigue, the irritable, like what else?
Sleep problems, aches and pains, eye styes. I got one going on right now that's hurting me right here. Difficulty swallowing can be a sign. Any kind of joint, back pain, hip pain, whatever, swelling, inflammation, hot rashes. What else? Rashes in general, like so in the early days, sometimes you go direct down and you get this sudden heat rash out of the blue. It can be itchy. It doesn't have to be itchy. This is like a mast cell reaction to oxalate moving. All of a sudden, oxalate's moving.
I had that in my early days of carnivore.
That's oxalate.
But I wasn't sure if that was also menopause. I mean, I was having all of these, that's when all of this stuff was happening with my, menstrual cycle and uterus. So, it was like, I don't know what's happening.
You are describing the universal dilemma, because oxalate symptoms start really getting bad in your 40s and early 50s. Well, that's always blamed on menopause. It's always a woman's thing. Oh, it's menopause. And of course, menopause can be stressful because we're toxic. I think if we weren't so malnourished and toxic, menopause would be easy. But the fact that it's not is because we've got this background burden. And so it takes several decades for oxalate to really kill you, like really get you in a bad place. And it happens at the time with menopause as well. So there's a lot of overlap, not only because of the timing, but because oxalate has been messing with your hormones. It causes hypofunction of all the glands. It can be your digestive glands that produce digestive enzymes. It can be your adrenal glands. It can be your sex glands. It can be your thyroid gland. There's something like 85% of us, if we're over 50, have oxalate crystals in our thyroid gland. Well, no wonder there's an epidemic of hypothyroid. We know from animal studies in the 70s that oxalate causes hypothyroidism and all kinds of isms with gland function.
Mm-hmm. And how long does it take to clear it? I mean, what I thought was interesting about Carnivore is at 6 months, I thought, I've healed so much. I must have hit the peak of my improvements, but I don't feel like I hit the peak until like 2 years, where I really I continued to improve for 2 years. And so now I sort of feel leveled off, but how long does it take to clear out all the excess, or do I still have excess?
Well, it seems to be for those of us, and it sounds like you've got enough oxalate in your background, you might be one of us, but one whose body is coping really well, despite what you've been through with this endometriosis, is probably your totem illness that you've had. It's about
and eczema, allergies, and asthma. We didn't even cover any of that. And I was going to ask you about eczema and oxalates next.
All of that is inflammation and immune system confusion. The oxalate ions and acid and the crystals that start developing in your cells and tissues all irritate the immune system and cause all kinds of immune confusion and start teaching your adaptive or learning immune system to react to your own stuff and to react to plants and stuff, because the crystals are like forming and it's teaching the T cells to learn to go after these tissues and crystals, and it all is wrapped up with, of course, and the crystals are forming where you have infections too, and there's so much going on there that I'm getting off track of what we're supposed to what you asked about.
Right.
The length of time. So people sometimes also want to know, like, every dumping cycle, how long is that going to last? And that can last everywhere from 1 day. I just say 3 days is the usual. Up comes an effort. And it's a two-day recovery process, 3 days of the individual episodes of, ooh, I can't sleep, or, ooh, I just got so much neck pain, or whatever it is, or eye stuff. But that can last for months, and a lot of us who are really big clearers are getting a little break once in a while, but most of the time feeling kind of sick for about 3.5 years. And then it comes easier. I'm still clearing oxalate. This eye is quite sore, and that's an oxalate thing. I'll be 8 years on this diet, the low oxalate diet, in around Thanksgiving. And I've been doing a carnivore, certainly the meat heavy 70% meat diet for about 4 years, maybe out of the 7. And I'm still loaded with oxalate in my spine. I know that. I still have edema in the spine bones. I still have a lot going on there. Bones can hold on to a lot of oxalate. So depending on where it is and how well you've cleared it in the past and so on, if it's hanging around in your spine bones and hip bones, it's probably still there. And maybe your body's leaving it alone a little bit and not clearing it heavily.
No, I think it is happening. Like, I just didn't know that that's what this was. I mean, like, my eczema, has been, that's been the most intractable thing. And, my asthma went away completely once I went carnivore and took out dairy. So I haven't used my inhaler at all. And the allergies, once I went carnivore, the allergies went away completely. So when I was keto, I was still using Flonase and Benadryl and all of that, and had to use it all the time and a ton of stuff. But my eczema has taken a much longer time, and I'm finding just now it's really starting to calm down, and it's smaller and smaller and smaller sections that are a problem. So I don't know if that is the oxalates as well, because I've like taken, I thought maybe it's histamines, and I thought, I've taken out so many things, but it seems to be improving And I am not actually seeing what the thing is that it's related to. So now it's making me think it probably is more the oxalates than anything.
Probably. Do you ever see cloudy urine? You ever notice urine is sort of cloudy and not real clear?
I can't say I look very often, so I don't know.
This is something, a skill. This is a skill I try to teach people to wash their urine, because when you're pouring out a lot of oxalate, it forms a lot of these small crystals, and the crystals refract light. So when you're pouring out crystals, this urine looks smeary and cloudy. And some people get into heavy detox in the first few years of oxalate clearing, and they'll get stinky bodies and orange and yellow and just like crazy colors of either their stools or their urine. They'll sometimes dump crystals from the with the feces, because the colon helps, and then you can get sort of like hemorrhoids and burning rectum. And so if you get pelvic heaviness or cloudy urine or burning rectum, that's all oxalate clearing that's related to the way the body gets rid of oxalate is with immune cells. So you create inflammation and create a lot of drama and unpleasant side effects when you're getting rid of oxalate. So a lot of times it shows up in the pelvis for a lot of women. Some of them continue to get the vaginal burning. And one woman I know calls it like Tabasco vagina or whatever. It's not good.
Yikes. So with eczema, is it coming out through my skin, or is my skin just getting irritated by it?
Yeah, the excretion routes include the skin, which is our biggest detox organ of all. And so some people are what we call skin dumpers. Susan Owens coined the term dumping, meaning oxalate clearing in big waves and like heavy oxalate clearing. In the skin, it's either the colon, the kidneys, or the skin. And you sound like a skin person. I'm a kidney person. I'm always peeing out cloudy urine. My kidneys are awesome. They are so cool. They can just crank out crystal, never get a kidney stone, never complain. I never see kidney pain. I don't get a lot of, interstitial cystitis and nighttime urination and jumpy bladder and burning urine. I don't get the symptoms. Just like me and my silent endometriosis, I can pee out crystals. I'm still peeing out crystals all the time. Here we go. But you sound like one of these skin clearers. Some people get these horrible rashes or itchy problems that take months and months to clear up. They get these waves of, the stuff you're describing. So,
well, I guess I am allergic to corn and soy. And so I notice whenever I eat corn, I get a rash from head to toe that takes weeks of constant daily Benadryl use and steroid creams to make go away. And so I finally stopped eating corn, but my friends will be like, oh, let's go to Mexican tonight. So I would go and I'd say, okay, I'll allow myself 5 corn chips. And I knew that if I had 5, I would just have the rash from knee to hip on one thigh. And I would just sort of moderate. Yeah. But now I see clearly, I don't know if that was an allergy or if it was just an oxalate thing. And that was my reaction to oxalates. I don't know.
Well, the mast cells really don't like oxalate crystals, and the oxalate gets the mast cells going. So you get into histamine cycles and these rash cycles and so on with just the oxalate. And then you add in another excuse to turn up the immune reactivity with these allergies. I think oxalate creates this hyperallergic state, and it creates these hyper unhappy mast cells that are just ready to come to your defense. It's like, calm down, buddy. And there are ways to get it to calm down. And one of the problems is the wrong fats. I think the body, after years of inflammation, like you've had all these inflammatory diseases forever, your body, it's harder and harder for it to shut it off. Normally an inflammatory response is just a little while, but it's hanging on because your body's not able to produce the chemicals that shut it off. It's all chemical communication, turning it on, turning it off, regulating it. And we need to restore your ability to shut it off so that when you do have reactions, they only last a couple days, not weeks.
Right. Well, one time I had this green, it was like a smoothie. It was supposed to be like a superfood powder that you make into a smoothie, and it has all the things. And I remember I took it one time, and the rash that I had was horrible. And it was so terrible. And from head to toe. And that must have been exactly what this was. It was just like my oxalate poisoning.
And you know what? This is interesting too, because it reminds me that if people talk about oxalate like sensitivity as if you're allergic to the oxalates. No, oxalates are turning up your immune reactivity and you're having allergic reactions because oxalate's so poisonous. But it's
Yeah.
not, and it's a, what's really happening to us is poisoning. We're getting toxic, and now
Yeah.
your body has this toxicity, which creates that reactivity. Um, and sometimes when you're on a carnivore or other type of low oxalate diet, the reactivity goes up now. Like the body is now, and I think one reason it's going up, like a little bit of oxalate might cause that kind of strong reaction quickly too, like right
Yeah,
away.
this was within hours. It
Yeah, because
was like,
there's a
yeah.
memory going on with all this monitoring. All your cells are like watching what's going on, and it's like ready to jump to your rescue. But see, on the carnivore or other form of low oxalate diet, your levels of oxalate in the bloodstream may be pretty elevated a lot of the time because you're constantly emptying it out of tissues. And then when you add a little bit more, it takes the whole situation of the level of oxalate toxicity and raises it to a level that's somewhat out of reach in terms of the body's regulation, and it overwashes the body's normal regulation. It keeps it going subclinically where you don't get the symptoms, but you throw in the green smoothie on top of clearing, and it just messes up the regulation. You get symptoms, you get just a frenzy of kind of like uncoordinated warfare going on.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like, even though it seems like those of us on a carnivore diet are super low oxalate, we're actually kind of borderline high because our body is clearing. And so when we add just a little bit, that could put us over the top. And so we have this reaction, which to what seems like a very small amount, but in fact, we've got a lot going on in our bodies at the moment. We just don't realize it because we're not eating it. It's coming from inside already.
That's right. That's well
Yeah.
said. And the only distinction there is knowing what a small amount really is. Like 2 ounces of chocolate is enough to put you over the top, but if a half ounce might have been enough to make the symptoms go down, because a little bit tells the gut, ooh, we're still eating oxalate, and it might close down the clearing reaction. So half an ounce of chocolate might lower symptoms. 2 ounces might send everything out of control.
So from what you're describing, I mean, I thought of myself as a person that didn't have a whole lot of oxalates because I wasn't eating certain things. But now, I mean, through this whole conversation, I realized all of these other random things that I was doing that really were probably hitting me with a ginormous loads of it. And I think I probably am still clearing even. And my skin is the place where it's happening, and my reproductive organs, like I think I went into menopause early, or I don't know what has gone on, and I've not been able to get any solution from doctors other than, do you want us to give you a hysterectomy? Do you want us to give you, an ablation, or do you want to take, birth control pills? That's all we can talk to you about. So, I don't know. I really have not felt like I had any guidance. And then when yeah. And when I first heard you talking about this, it was like mind blowing, but also sort of overwhelming. And there's not a lot of answers. And I feel like this is just the way it is with women's health. Like, we have no answers for you. What we told women in 1229, that's the same thing we're telling you in, 2012 or 2021. So good luck. And and so I feel like, you're like giving all of this information, which is super helpful, but there's not the money and the research behind it to actually really implement this in a way that is, helpful for the people who are not, good, like at running experiments and knowing how to do that in their own bodies. So what do we do? Like, how do we figure this out? I know everybody has been listening to this and they're like, oh my God, I mean, this is mind blowing, but now what?
Yeah, well, in the big picture, I think that, we're going to attract, this is going on in so many lives. And that oxalate, once you get a chance to really be able to think it through in your own story and your own experience, it starts to make a ton of sense. It starts to solve a lot of these mysteries. So now you've gotten somewhere. It's like there's a certain peace in that. Even if you have a lot of health problems, there's a certain peace in knowing, well, at least I know what the enemy is. I know what my problem is. And there is the body knows how to handle oxalate and tries to heal us, as long as we haven't gone so long that there's certain damage that can't be reversed. But generally, give your body the nutrients and get rid of the toxin, and boy, a lot of cool things happen. That's why carnivore has gotten so popular out of the blue. In 5 years, it's just blown up all over, and it's now recognized by mainstream people as a thing. It wasn't a thing. And oxalate's going to be the same way, because oxalate is part of the carnivore story. The same kind of profound effects in our lives once we get a little picture of how this works. And it is a complicated story. So when you first hear about it, it's like, ugh, can't go there, especially if you're sick. You don't have extra brain cells to figure this out. And that was the way I was. Like, I was too sick to really get it. And it took me years of research and then helping people. And it's like, wait a minute, it's not just me, it's everywhere. And I'm fearing that maybe half of humanity is being harmed by oxalate. Like, it's a lot of us. But I think that gives us great hope that we will eventually take a bunch of people with endometriosis and teach them the diet and monitor them and learn, how much after the fact, after we have endometriosis, how much of this can be calmed down. The encouraging thing is that a lot of us with these autoimmune type illnesses start to feel like our autoimmune disease was nothing. It's not an autoimmune disease. It was oxalate poisoning. And we feel like, oh, well, I used to think I had 100 autoimmune diseases. I had so many things wrong with me, but all I had was oxalate poisoning, which is not a small thing. It's a profoundly bad thing. And I would love to have less people have this problem.
Wow. Yeah, this is, yeah. I thank you so much for the work that you do. It is so powerful and so meaningful. And, for everyone who's watching this, like, how can they support you and support, this, this research? Like, can we write letters to our Congress people? Is there a foundation to donate to? Do you take, contributions? Like, what can we do to help move this further along?
Yeah, I love this activist spirit, because that's exactly what we're going to need. We're going to need 100 women marches on, and get our favorite congressperson to advocate this issue. I think we're really in such an early stage now. It's a matter of, yes, if you can support the Vulva Pain Foundation, if you can support me so we can get some help, like, we have to have some funding to get more people able to spend their time and money. I've been able to spend my time on this because my husband pays the bills, but most people aren't like that. Like, I've devoted 7 years because this is wrong. I mean, it's just morally wrong to have so much information languishing and us suffering. So it is important that we think advocacy, and we're getting there. I think the most important thing is to reach up within your network and help the minister's wife and help people who are in positions of influence to learn about oxalate and whether it's affecting their health. Help keep their minds open, help keep them interested in this topic, because the more people in positions of influence that are starting to see this, then the 100th monkey phenomenon will happen. And suddenly this is so real that even academic researchers will have to admit we got to study it.
So that means that people should go to your YouTube channel and your Instagram channel to find further information and to continue their research, and also buy your book when it comes out. When is it expected?
We don't have a pub date yet, but it's certainly by this time next year, it will be out there.
Okay.
Hopefully much sooner than that. And I'll let you know when we get a date. And the one opportunity is you can come join my group sessions and hear from other people and really get it straight for yourself. I think oxygen mask first on you. Get your health straight. Get your own vitality back. Give yourself your time off that you need to take care of yourself. And then, but you need support. So it's small. I try to make so people can meet each other. We're doing one this afternoon. But get involved, get to know me, send me your story. If you have a story, I'm doing interviews with people who want to do testimonials, and I've found somebody to help me edit them down so we can create a lot of testimonials up on the YouTube channel. Look at me on Instagram. There's a lot of stuff hidden in multiple slides on my Instagram posts and website. And mostly, like, please, thank you for covering this topic, because that's the most important thing, is sharing, communicating, and let's get real that this is a real thing and we can help an awful lot of people.
Wow. Well, thank you so much again. And so for everybody watching, I'm going to make sure all the links and everything are in the descriptions. You can go to, her website, figure out how to join her groups and how to follow along. And, let's just keep fighting for, women's health, women's reproductive health, and make sure that oxalates are out there. And they're a problem for everybody, not just women, certainly. So, we definitely want to raise the awareness. And I feel like I still have so many more questions. There could be a part 2 and a part 3, but I know I've kept you on for so long, and I really appreciate your being willing to give this much time to talk about this really important topic. And hopefully I can have you back, or we can continue the conversation. And thank you again.
Thank you. You are a superstar, and I'm so glad we're getting a chance to work together. And I'm looking forward to the next conversations, because this is a lifelong conversation. I'm going to try to not shut up about it.
Well, I'm with you. I'm absolutely with you. All right. Thanks, everyone. And I will see you all on the next podcast.